Danny Cole stepped off the transport shuttle and took his first breath of alien air. It smelled like copper and flowers mixed together. Strange, but not unpleasant. He adjusted the strap of his bag and looked around at the Galactic University of Varith Prime. The buildings were tall and curved like frozen waves. Students of dozens of species walked between them on floating pathways. Some had 4 legs. Some had tentacles. Some floated without any legs at all. Danny was the only human in sight, and everyone seemed to notice. A group of small blue creatures stopped talking when he walked past. A tall being with scales turned its head to watch him. Danny tried to smile at them, but they quickly looked away. He had expected this. Humans had only made contact with the galactic community 3 years ago. Most aliens had never seen a human in person before. To them, Danny was like a strange animal that had wandered onto their campus. "You must be the exchange student." Danny turned to see a young female alien approaching him. She was humanoid, but covered in soft gray fur, with large dark eyes and pointed ears. Her species was called Fusion, according to his orientation materials. "I'm Danny," he said, offering his hand. She looked at his hand with confusion. Then she slowly reached out and touched it with her fingertips. "I am Lyra," she said. "I have been assigned as your guide. Please follow me." Danny followed her across the floating pathway. Other students moved out of their way, giving Danny more space than necessary. "They're staring," Danny said quietly. "Yes," Lyra replied. "Humans are new to the galaxy. Many students have only seen your species in reports. The reports are concerning." "Concerning how?" Lyra hesitated. "Your planet is classified as a death world. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, dangerous predators. The fact that your species survived at all is considered remarkable and troubling." Danny nodded. He had heard this before during his preparation for the exchange program. Earth was apparently much harsher than most inhabited planets. What humans considered normal was terrifying to other species. "I promise I'm not dangerous," Danny said. Lyra did not respond to that dot. She led him to a large building with symbols he could not read. His translator implant told him it said, "Department of Historical Warfare Studies." "This is where you will take most of your classes," Lyra explained. "Professor Crixton is the head of the department. He is particular. He does not like being corrected, or questioned, or interrupted." Lyra paused. "He also does not believe humans belong at this university." Danny felt his stomach tighten. Great. They entered the building and walked through long hallways filled with display cases. Danny saw weapons and armor from dozens of worlds. Some looked familiar. Others looked like nothing he had ever seen. His eyes lingered on each one as they passed. Lyra noticed. "You are interested in weapons?" "I'm a history major," Danny said. "Military history specifically. Weapons tell you a lot about a civilization." Lyra's ears flattened slightly. "That is an unusual area of study. On Earth, it's pretty common." They reached a large lecture hall where other students were already seated. Danny was directed to a seat in the back. He sat down and looked around at his classmates. There were about 30 students of various species. None of them sat near him. The door at the front of the room opened, and Professor Crixton entered. He was a Valari, an insectoid species with 6 limbs and a hard shell that shimmered green and gold. His movements were precise and mechanical. 4 of his arms held data tablets while his front 2 gestured as he spoke. "Good morning, students," the professor said. His voice was sharp and clicking. "Today is a special occasion. We have a new student joining us from a recently contacted species." Every head turned to look at Danny. "The human will be observing our class," Professor Crixton continued. I trust you will all help him understand concepts that may be beyond his species' comprehension." Danny kept his face neutral, but he felt the insult. "Now then," the professor said, "I have exciting news. Tomorrow's class will be held in my private museum. Over 300 years, I have collected rare weapons from across the galaxy. Many of these pieces exist nowhere else. It will be an educational experience for all of you." The other students murmured with excitement. Apparently, the professor's collection was famous. "You will observe only," Professor Crixton added. "These artifacts are irreplaceable. No touching, no photographing, and no opinions unless asked." His compound eyes seemed to focus on Danny for that last part. After the lecture ended, Lyra met Danny outside the hall. "The professor's collection is legendary," she said. "Scholars travel from across the galaxy to view it. You should consider yourself fortunate to see it so early in your studies." "He doesn't seem to want me there," Danny said. "He does not want to be embarrassed," Lyra replied. "Humans are unknown, unpredictable. Professor Crixton has spent his entire career being the smartest person in every room. He does not like uncertainty." Danny thought about that. "I'll stay quiet. I don't want to cause trouble. That would be wise." Lyra hesitated. "Danny, I must ask you something. The reports about humans say your species is violent, that you have fought many wars among yourselves. Is this true?" Danny was quiet for a moment. "Yes, it's true." Lyra's ears pressed flat against her head. Why? It was a simple question with no simple answer. Danny had asked himself the same thing many times while studying history. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we're trying to be better." Lyra seemed to accept that answer. She led him to his dormitory and left him at the door. That night, Danny lay in his small room and thought about tomorrow. A collection of weapons from across the galaxy. 300 years of gathering. The professor was clearly proud of it. Danny closed his eyes and tried to sleep. But his mind kept drifting to the display cases he had seen in the hallway. Some of those weapons had looked familiar. Too familiar. He told himself he would stay quiet. He would observe and learn. He would not cause any problems. He really hoped he could keep that promise. The museum wing was larger than Danny had expected. Glass cases lined every wall, each one containing weapons that gleamed under soft lighting. The ceiling was high enough to display full-sized war machines. Banners with symbols from 100 different worlds hung between them. Danny walked in with the other students, his eyes moving from case to case. His heart was beating a little faster than usual. This was exactly the kind of place he had dreamed about since he was a child reading history books on Earth. Professor Crixton stood at the center of the room, all 6 limbs folded behind him. He looked pleased with himself as the students gasped and pointed at various displays. "Welcome to my life's work," the professor announced. 3 centuries of careful acquisition. Many of these pieces were recovered from dead worlds. Others were gifts from grateful governments. A few were purchased at great personal expense. Lyra stood beside Danny. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Remember what I said." "I remember," Danny whispered back. The professor began moving through the collection, stopping at each case to explain its contents. His knowledge was impressive. He spoke about metallurgy, cultural significance, and historical context. The other students listened with admiration. Danny listened too. But as the professor spoke, Danny noticed something. Several of his explanations were wrong, not completely wrong, just slightly off. The professor understood what the weapons looked like, but he did not always understand how they were meant to be used. Danny kept his mouth shut. He had promised to stay quiet. They stopped at a case containing a curved blade with a wooden handle. The blade was about 3 feet long, with a gentle curve near the tip. "This piece comes from the Keth Wars," Professor Crixton explained. Notice the decorative curve near the end. This was likely a ceremonial weapon used by priests or nobles. Too impractical for actual combat. Danny's hand twitched. He forced it to stay at his side. The curve is purely aesthetic, the professor continued. A sign of wealth and status rather than function. Danny closed his eyes. He told himself to stay quiet. It did not matter. He was just an exchange student. He did not need to correct the 300-year-old scholar in front of the entire class. But his mouth opened anyway. Actually, sir, the curve is functional. Every head in the room turned toward him. Professor Crixton's compound eyes focused on Danny with an intensity that made him want to disappear. Excuse me? The professor said, Danny swallowed. He had already started. He might as well finish. The curve allows for draw cuts while mounted, Danny explained. The rider doesn't have to swing the blade. They just hold it out and let the movement of their mount do the work. The curve keeps the blade from getting stuck in the target. It slides through instead of catching. The room was completely silent. On Earth, we had similar weapons, Danny continued. Cavalry sabers. The curve served the same purpose. Professor Crixton stared at him for a long moment. An interesting theory, he finally said. But you are mistaken. The Keth did not use mounted warfare. Their primary continent was mostly grassland, Danny replied. He had studied the Keth briefly during his preparation for the program. Flat terrain. Open fields. That's exactly where mounted warfare becomes most effective. The professor's mandibles clicked together. It sounded like irritation. A lucky guess, he said. Perhaps humans simply see violence everywhere they look. He moved on to the next case. Danny felt Lyra grab his arm. What are you doing? She hissed. I'm sorry, Danny whispered. I couldn't help it. The next case contained a heavy weapon with a thick metal head and a reinforced handle. The head had a pointed end on one side and a flat surface on the other. This is a ceremonial mace from the Varth Empire, the professor explained. The excessive weight suggests it was meant for display rather than use. A symbol of authority. Danny bit his lip. He really tried to stay quiet this time. He failed. That's a warhammer, Danny said. The pointed end is for punching through armor. The flat end is for blunt trauma against unarmored targets. The weight is intentional. You need mass to transfer force through protective plating. The other students were staring at him now. Some looked annoyed. Others looked curious. Lyra looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Professor Crixton turned slowly to face Danny. You seem to have many opinions. I'm sorry, Professor. I study this. It's hard to stay quiet when you think you know more than a scholar who has dedicated 3 centuries to this field. Danny felt his face grow hot. No, sir. Perhaps you would like to assess the entire collection, the professor interrupted. His voice was cold now. Since you clearly believe yourself more qualified than I am. The challenge hung in the air. Danny knew he should apologize and back down. He knew this was a test he was supposed to fail, but something stubborn inside him refused to let that happen. Okay, Danny said quietly. The professor's mandibles clicked again. Excuse me? I'll assess the collection, Danny repeated. If you'll allow it. For a moment, Professor Crixton seemed genuinely surprised. Then his compound eyes narrowed. Very well, human. Let us see how much you truly know. He gestured toward the rest of the museum. Please, educate us. Danny looked at the cases stretching out before him. Dozens of weapons. Hundreds of years of collection. A galaxy of violence preserved in glass. He took a deep breath and walked to the next case. Behind him, he heard Lyra whisper something that sounded like a prayer. Danny stood before the next case and looked at the weapon inside. It was a long pole with a blade at one end and a hook at the other. The professor's label said, it was a fishing tool from a coastal civilization. "This is a polearm," Danny said. "The blade is for cutting at distance. The hook is for pulling mounted riders off their animals. Fishing civilizations still fight wars. They just adapt their tools." Professor Crix then said nothing. The other students watched in complete silence. Danny moved to the next case. This one held a short blade with a thick spine and a single sharp edge. The handle was wrapped in rough material for grip. "This is a utility knife that became a weapon," Danny explained. The thick spine lets the user put their offhand on top and push down for extra force. The rough handle keeps it from slipping when wet, probably used by a species that fought in humid conditions. He moved on before the professor could respond. The next case contained what looked like a metal ring with sharpened edges. The label called it jewelry. "Throwing ring," Danny said. "You spin it off your finger. The rotation keeps it stable in flight. The edges are sharpened for cutting. Concealable. Easy to carry multiple. A weapon for assassination rather than battle." Case after case. Weapon after weapon. Danny did not stop moving. He found a collection of small metal balls that the professor had labeled as game pieces. Danny explained they were projectiles for a weapon similar to a sling. He found a decorated stick that was supposedly a walking cane. He identified it as a club disguised to look harmless. He found what the professor called ancient art and explained it was a garrote, a strangling wire with handles on each end. The other students had stopped whispering. They just watched as Danny systematically dismantled 300 years of careful research. Professor Crix then followed behind him. The clicking of his mandibles had stopped. He was completely silent now. Danny reached the larger case in the center of the room. Inside was a metal device that looked like a tube attached to a wooden frame. The label said, "Unknown origin. Possibly ritualistic. Believed to be a musical instrument." Danny stopped. His breath caught in his throat. "This," he started. Then he had to stop and collect himself. "This is not from an alien world." Professor Crix then finally spoke. "What do you mean?" "This is from Earth." Danny's voice was quiet now, almost sad. "This is a firearm. Specifically, it's a trench gun. We used these in a conflict called the First World War." The professor moved closer to the case. "Impossible. I acquired this from a trader who specializes in artifacts from extinct civilizations." "He assured me. He lied to you," Danny said. "Or he didn't know what he had." He pointed at markings on the wooden frame. "Those are manufacturing stamps. Human letters. Human numbers." The class was completely silent. "What does it do?" Lyra asked quietly. Danny looked at her. He wished she had not asked that question. "It fires metal projectiles at high speed," he explained. "Fast enough to punch through bodies. We used weapons like this to kill each other by the millions. The First World War alone killed over 20 million people. This specific type was designed for close combat in underground tunnels called trenches." He paused, remembering the history he had studied. The fighting was so brutal that soldiers would hear each other screaming in the dark. They would fight with anything they had: guns, knives, shovels, their bare hands. This weapon was designed to be effective in those conditions. Short barrel so it would not catch on tunnel walls. Powerful enough to kill at close range. Professor Crix then was staring at the weapon now. His compound eyes reflected the soft museum light. "How many?" he asked. Danny looked at him. "How many what? How many wars has your species fought?" Danny thought about how to answer that. He thought about the countless conflicts throughout human history. The wars that shaped civilizations. The wars that destroyed them. The wars fought over land, resources, religion, pride. The wars fought for no reason anyone could remember. "I don't know the exact number," Danny admitted. But in recorded history, there have been thousands, maybe more than 15,000 separate armed conflicts. The professor sat down on a bench. His 6 limbs seemed to lose their strength all at once. In 300 years, he said quietly, I have documented warfare across 400 civilizations. The total number of conflicts I have recorded is less than 2,000. Danny did not know what to say. Your species has been killing each other for your entire existence, the professor continued. Every generation, every century, without pause. Yes, Danny said. It was the truth. He saw no point in denying it. The other students were looking at Danny differently now. The curiosity was still there, but it was mixed with something else. Fear, or maybe horror. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. How are you still alive? How did your species not destroy itself? Danny looked at the weapon in the case. The weapon designed to kill humans. Made by humans. I don't know, he said honestly. Sometimes I wonder that myself. Professor Crix then stood up slowly. His movements were uncertain now, as if he had forgotten how his own body worked. Class is dismissed, he said. His voice was flat, empty. I need to review my research. He walked out of the museum without looking back. The students began to leave, glancing at Danny as they passed. None of them spoke to him soon. Only Danny and Lyra remained. You should not have done that, Lyra said. But her voice was not angry. It was sad. I know, Danny replied. But he asked. He looked around at the collection one more time. Hundreds of weapons from across the galaxy. Tools of death from 1,000 different worlds. And one weapon from Earth. That had proven more terrifying than all of them combined. Not because of what it could do, but because of what it represented. Danny left the museum and went to find the professor. Danny found Professor Crixton in his office. The door was open, so he knocked gently on the frame. The professor was sitting at his desk, surrounded by stacks of data tablets and old paper documents. He did not look up when Danny knocked. May I come in? Danny asked. You might as well, the professor replied. His voice was tired. Danny stepped inside. The office was filled with artifacts and awards. Certificates covered the walls. Medals hung from hooks. The professor had been celebrated across the galaxy for his expertise. Now he sat among his achievements, looking completely defeated. I wanted to apologize, Danny said. I should not have corrected you in front of the class. It was disrespectful. The professor finally looked up. His compound eyes studied Danny's face. You were not wrong, he said. That is the problem. In 300 years, no student has ever corrected me. Not once. And certainly not dozens of times in a single session. Danny shifted his weight. I didn't mean to humiliate me? The professor's mandibles clicked softly. Perhaps not. But you did. And you did it with such ease that I am now questioning everything I have ever believed about myself. He picked up one of the data tablets on his desk. His hand was trembling slightly. I have written 47 published papers on historical warfare, he continued. I have advised governments on military strategy. I have been called the foremost expert on weapons in the known galaxy. And today, a 22-year-old human made me look like a fool. Danny sat down in a chair across from the desk. He had not been invited to sit, but standing felt wrong. Professor, your knowledge is still valuable. You understand the cultural context of these civilizations. You understand their histories, their politics, their art. I only understand the weapons. But the weapons are my specialty, the professor said. Or they were supposed to be. He set down the tablet and looked at Danny directly. Tell me honestly, human, how did you know all of that? How could you identify weapons from species you have never encountered? From worlds you have never visited? Danny thought carefully about his answer. Because weapons follow patterns, he said. Physics is the same everywhere. If you want to cut something, you need an edge. If you want to crush something, you need weight. If you want to pierce armor, you need a point. The details change, but the principles stay the same. He leaned forward slightly. Humans have been experimenting with violence for thousands of years. We have tried every possible way to hurt each other. Every type of blade. Every type of projectile. Every type of poison and trap and siege weapon. We have refined the art of killing to an exact science. The professor was silent for a long moment. That is terrifying, he finally said. Yes, Danny agreed. It is. And you are not proud of this knowledge? Danny shook his head. No, I wish we didn't have it. I wish our history was peaceful. But I cannot change what my species has done. I can only try to understand it. The professor stood up and walked to his window. Outside, students were walking between buildings, going about their normal lives. None of them knew what had happened in the museum. When I first heard that a human would be joining my department, I was angry, the professor admitted. I thought your species was too primitive to contribute anything meaningful. I thought you would waste my time and embarrass yourself. He turned back to face Danny. I was the one who was embarrassed. And perhaps that is what I deserved for my arrogance. Danny stood up. Professor, I didn't come here to prove anything. I just came to learn. But you have taught me something instead, the professor said. You have taught me that knowledge without understanding is worthless. I have spent 300 years collecting weapons, but I never truly understood them. I saw them as objects to be categorized and displayed. You see them as tools with purpose. He walked back to his desk, picked up another data tablet. I have been reviewing your academic records, he said. Your professors on Earth speak highly of you. They say you have an intuitive understanding of military history that they have rarely seen. Danny felt uncomfortable with the praise. I just pay attention. No. The professor shook his head. It is more than that. Your species carries violence in your memory, in your instincts, in your bones. You understand weapons because you have evolved alongside them. They are part of your heritage. He set down the tablet and looked at Danny. I have spent my life studying warfare from the outside. You understand it from the inside. And I have been too proud to recognize the difference. Danny did not know what to say. He had expected anger, not confession. Professor, your work still matters. You have preserved weapons that would have been lost forever. You have documented civilizations that no longer exist. That has value. Perhaps, the professor said. But I wonder now how many mistakes I have made. How many weapons I have mislabeled. How many cultures I have misunderstood. He sat back down heavily. I need to review everything. 300 years of work. Every paper. Every label. Every assumption. Danny felt a wave of guilt. He had not meant to cause this much damage. I could help, he offered. If you want. The professor looked up at him. For the first time, there was something other than defeat in his eyes. There was curiosity. You would do that? After how I treated you? Danny shrugged. You were trying to protect your life's work. I understand that. And besides, reviewing your collection sounds like exactly the kind of thing I came here to do. The professor was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, his mandibles clicked in. What Danny had learned was the Valari equivalent of a smile. Perhaps, he said, this exchange program was not such a bad idea after all. News spread quickly through the university. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know what had happened in Professor Crixton's museum. The human exchange student had corrected the galaxy's greatest weapons expert. Dozens of times. In a single hour, Danny noticed the change immediately. Students no longer avoided him out of uncertainty. Now they watched him with a different kind of attention. Some were curious. Some were nervous. A few seemed genuinely afraid. He was eating breakfast alone in the dining hall when a group of students approached his table. They were from different departments, different species, different worlds. But they all had the same question in their eyes. "Is it true?" asked a tall being with silver scales. "You identified weapons that Professor Crixton could not?" Danny set down his food. "I corrected some of his assessments. That's all." "That's not what we heard," said another student, a small creature covered in soft feathers. "We heard you told him things about his own collection that he had never known. Things he had been wrong about for centuries." Danny sighed. "The professor understands these weapons better than I do in most ways. He knows their history and their cultural meaning. I just understand how they were used." The students exchanged glances. They did not seem convinced. "We heard you have a weapon from your own world in his collection," the scaled student continued. "Is that true?" Danny thought about the trench gun sitting in its case. A piece of Earth's violent history preserved on an alien world. "Yes," he admitted. The students were quiet for a moment. Then the feathered one spoke again. "What is it like?" "Your world?" Danny considered the question. He thought about Earth, about its oceans and mountains and forests, about its cities and villages and farms, about its billions of people, all living together on one small planet. "It's beautiful," he said, "and dangerous. We have predators that can kill with a single bite. We have storms that flatten entire cities. We have diseases that have killed millions." He paused. "And we have each other. You mean other humans?" The scaled student asked. "Yes, humans have always been the most dangerous thing on Earth. We compete for resources. We fight over territory. We go to war for reasons that seem important at the time and meaningless a generation later." He looked around at the students who had gathered. "But we also cooperate. We build things together. We help each other survive." The same species that invented weapons also invented medicine and art and music. We are capable of terrible cruelty and incredible kindness, often in the same breath. The students did not seem to know how to respond to that. Danny picked up his food again. "I'm not here to scare anyone. I'm just here to learn. Same as you." Over the next few weeks, things changed. Professor Crixton officially invited Danny to become his research assistant. Together, they began reviewing the entire collection. Danny would assess each weapon while the professor provided cultural and historical context. Their collaboration was slow at first, awkward with the memory of what had happened. But gradually, it became something productive. Other professors began approaching Danny as well. A scholar of ancient civilizations asked him to examine a collection of tools that might have been weapons. A military historian from another department wanted his opinion on a centuries-old, tactical puzzle. Even the university administration seemed interested in his perspective. Danny was not comfortable with the attention. He had never wanted to be famous for understanding violence. But he realized something important during those weeks. His knowledge, dark as it was, could actually help. By understanding how weapons worked, he could help others understand the civilizations that made them. The violence was terrible, but the understanding was valuable. One evening, Lyra found him in the library. He was surrounded by books and tablets, researching a weapon the professor had asked him to examine. "You have become popular," she observed. Danny looked up. "I wouldn't say popular. More like a curiosity." Lyra sat down across from him. Her large eyes studied his face. "The other students talk about you," she said. "They say humans are more dangerous than anyone realized. They say your species should never have been allowed into the galactic community." Danny felt his stomach tighten. "Is that what you think?" Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head. No, I think humans are exactly what the galaxy needs. Danny blinked. What do you mean? You understand violence in a way no other species does, Lyra explained. You know how to hurt, how to kill, how to destroy. But you also know how to stop. She leaned forward. In 3 years since first contact, humans have not started a single conflict with any alien species. You have been peaceful, patient, cooperative. She paused to let that sink in. A species that knows violence but chooses peace is more valuable than a species that has never known violence at all. You understand the cost of war, and you have decided it is not worth paying. Danny thought about her words. He thought about all the conflicts in human history, all the death and suffering and waste. And he thought about the choice humanity had made when they finally reached the stars. They could have conquered. They could have destroyed. They could have done what they had always done to each other. Instead, they had chosen to be different. I hope you're right, Danny said quietly. Lyra smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile. I know I am, she said. At the end of the semester, Professor Crixton announced a new course. It would be called Applied Warfare Studies, a Human Perspective. Danny would assist in teaching it. On the first day, the lecture hall was packed. Students from every department had come to listen. Some wanted to understand human violence. Others wanted to understand how humans had survived it. Danny stood at the front of the room, feeling nervous. Professor Crixton stood beside him, his 6 limbs folded calmly. Before we begin, the professor said, I want to share something I have learned this semester. I spent 300 years believing I understood warfare. I was wrong. Understanding weapons is not the same as understanding violence. And understanding violence is not the same as understanding peace. He gestured toward Danny. Humans understand all three, and that is why they are here. After the lecture, Lyra approached Danny as he was gathering his materials. That went well, she said. Danny nodded. Better than I expected. Lyra hesitated. Then she asked a question that had clearly been on her mind for a while. In the professor's collection, what was the most dangerous weapon you saw? Danny thought about all the blades and projectiles and killing tools. He thought about the trench gun from Earth. He thought about the centuries of violence preserved in glass cases. None of them, he said. Lyra looked confused. None of them? Danny smiled. The most dangerous weapon is never the one in the case. It's the one in someone's hands who knows how to use it. And the most dangerous person is the one who knows how to use it but chooses not to. He picked up his bag and walked toward the door. That's what humanity is trying to be, he said over his shoulder. The most dangerous species in the galaxy who chooses peace anyway. Lyra watched him go, her eyes thoughtful, and somewhere in the museum, a trench gun sat in its case, silent and still. A reminder of what humans had been and what they were trying to become.